Greetings again everyone, and today I'm checking out a brand new lens from Sony, their FE 85mm f1.4 G Master Mark II. The original 85mm G Master lens was one of the first three that Sony ever designed, all the way back in 2016 now, and while it's still a truly fantastic lens, Sony have decided to make a load of little improvements to it based off of consumer feedback. They've tweaked the lens's optics, made the lens smaller and lighter, and boosted the autofocus speed to outrun the slightly leaden pace of the original. At a price of £1,850 here in the UK, which should be a little over $2,000 US, you certainly have to pay through the nose for these improvements, so let's take a closer look and see if they're really worth it. I'd like to thank Sony UK for loaning me this lens for a couple of weeks for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review and they've had no input into its content whatsoever. And if you don't know why it is that fast 85mm lenses are so popular among professionals, then you're probably pretty new to photography. They are ideal for portrait photography, getting you a lovely emphasis on your subject and potentially a very deeply out of focus background for a very striking effect. But 85mm images are also quite pleasing to the eye because they're not so telephoto that they completely compress your background into oblivion. They still feel like they're an interesting part of your final image. Let's take a look at this little monster's build quality. It's rather big, but it doesn't feel too front heavy on your camera, being quite well balanced, especially compared to the original, and it's 13% smaller and 20% lighter than the original 85mm lens. Its body is mostly made of plastic, but it certainly feels very solid and tightly assembled. It weighs nearly 665 grams, or about 1.5 pounds, so it's also a bit on the weighty side. The lens is advertised as being quite well weather sealed, and it does indeed have a slight weather sealing gasket on the rear mount. There are a lot of control points on the lens also, which is always handy. It saves you having to fiddle around changing things in the camera's options menu. First comes the aperture ring, which can be set to click nice and confidently every third of an f-stop, or it can be set to turn smoothly, which yields some lovely smooth aperture changes when video making. It can also be locked in or out of automatic mode, a feature I personally really appreciate. We also get a manual focus switch and a couple of focus hold buttons on the side. Then comes a rubberized manual focus ring, which turns satisfyingly smoothly. The focus ring can be set to work with a linear response for video making, and as you can see here, the lens exhibits only a little bit of focus breathing, zooming in a little as you focus more closely. Now let's see about the autofocus motor. It works quickly, accurately and silently here in single shot autofocus mode. Pretty impressive for an f1.4 lens. In continuous autofocus mode it runs even faster. Impressive for a portrait optic. This thing could quite easily be used for sports photography I think, and it's much faster than the original 85mm G Master lens. It comes with a nice carry case and a very good quality hood with a rubber trim on the outside edge. It has a 77mm filter thread size and does not feature image stabilization. Overall, we are looking at wonderful build quality here, which really makes a difference. The lens is very enjoyable to handle and use out in the real world, and I'm especially impressed with its fast, silent autofocus system. More importantly though is the lens's image quality, so let's start by testing it on a full frame camera, my 42MP Sony a7R III. In-camera corrections are turned on. In the middle of the image at f1.4 we see perfect sharpness and contrast with neutral colours. That excellent image quality continues across the whole image frame, as you can see here. Amazing! Although if you stop down to f2, then corner image quality improves from being excellent to being absolutely astonishing. The lens stays this sharp down to f11, although f16 sees a little softness emerging due to diffraction. Overall though, on a full frame camera it's 10 out of 10 here for sharpness and contrast. Let's see how it performs on a cropped sensor of my 24 megapixel aps-c camera now. At f1.4 we see excellent image quality in the middle again, although with just the tiniest little hint of ghosting on contrasting edges. Picture quality on the periphery looks basically the same. Stop down to f2 though for perfect sharpness and contrast in the corners, and back into the middle of the image also. The lens stays this sharp down to f8. f11 and f16 see softness emerging though due to diffraction, but on an aps-c camera it's still an excellent performance here too. Alright, let's go back to full frame, turn off in-camera corrections and take a look at distortion and vignetting. I remember vignetting being really bad on the original G Master lens, but on this new version it seems to fall more subtly and is much less noticeable. Stop down to f2 or f2.8 and those corners brighten up nicely. The lens only projects an edge of pincushion distortion here, so it's a very good performance overall. Next, close-up image quality, and one thing I do wish was that this lens could focus down closer to smaller subjects. That's one improvement I'd love to have seen. Anyway, close-up image quality is quite sharp at f1.4 and at f2, excellent again. Let's see how the lens performs against bright lights now. Here we get another improvement over its predecessor, as the lens barely displays any flaring at all here, maintaining excellent contrast. Nice. Let's see about the lens's bokeh now, a really important feature. The bokeh certainly looks very smooth here, and even difficult subjects and foregrounds are rendered perfectly nicely. Specular highlights are very clean, with no highlighting, although the lens does seem to suffer from a rather strong cat's eye shape to highlights on the image periphery, as you can see here. Finally, let's take a look at longitudinal chromatic aberration. At f1.4 it's there, but it's a bit lower than average and a little lower than the lens's predecessor. At f2 it's virtually gone, and at f2.8 totally gone. Overall, well, this lens may be very expensive, but Sony have achieved what they set out to do, essentially make the best 85mm optic in existence, and they pretty much win the prize for that. How does it compare to its predecessor from 2016? Well, the new lens, according to the tests backed up on my hard drive, is only very marginally sharper, more noticeable when shooting on an aps-c camera. The new lens also enjoys slightly lower vignetting, slightly lower longitudinal chromatic aberration, slightly smoother bokeh, slightly sharper close-up image quality, considerably less flaring and glaring when faced against bright light, and it has considerably faster autofocus, which works a little more quietly as well. The new lens is also 20% lighter and 13% smaller, which is helpful, and has the option for linear response manual focusing for video makers. So that's quite the laundry list really, which, while mostly being small improvements, all add up. The price you have to pay for this lens, as I mentioned, is certainly excessive, but it really is about the best there is, and with its improved autofocus, even sports photographers might get great use out of this one, so it certainly has to come highly recommended if you're on a correspondingly high budget. Did you enjoy that video? Well, you weren't really supposed to, it's more of an avant-garde piece really, but if that's your kind of thing anyway, then check out my channel for about 800 more camera lens reviews, all neatly ordered into handy playlists, and if you really appreciate these videos, then check out my Patreon page down in the description below for more ways to support the channel and get a whole load of exclusive bonus content too.